This is Marbury v. Madison. So, the gist of it is the Supreme Court was led by Justice John Marshall, who decided the landmark case of William Marbury v. James Madison, the Secretary of State of the United States, and confirms the legal principle of judicial review, the ability of the Supreme Court to limit congressional power by declaring legislation unconstitutional in the new nation. The Judiciary Act of 1789 gave the Supreme Court jurisdiction, but the Marshall Court ruled that the Act of 1789 was an unconstitutional extension of judiciary power into the realm of the executive. In writing the decision, John Marshall argued that acts of Congress were in conflict with the Constitution and therefore non-binding to the courts, and the judiciary's first responsibility was and is always to uphold the Constitution. So, if the two laws conflicted, Marshall wrote that the court bears responsibility for deciding which law applies in any of the given case. Thus, Marbury never received his job. So, Jefferson and Madison objected to Marbury's appointment and those of all the midnight judges that were appointed by the previous president, John Adams, after Jefferson was elected. But this happened hours before he even took office. So, to further aggravate the Democratic and Republican administration, many of these Federalist judges, although Marbury was not one of them, were taking the bench in new courts formed by the Judiciary Act, which the Federalist Congress passed on February 13 in 1801, less than a month before Jefferson's inauguration, which was on March 4th. As part of the Revolution of 1800, President Thomas Jefferson and his Democratic-Republican followers launched a series of attacks against the Federalist-controlled courts. So, the new Democratic-Republican Party controlled Congress, and they easily eliminated most of the midnight judges by repealing the Judiciary Act in 1802. And then in 1803, William Marbury had been appointed a Justice of the Peace for the District of Columbia in the final hours of Adams' administration. When James Madison, Thomas Jefferson's Secretary of State, refused to deliver Marbury's commission, Marbury, who was joined by three other similarly situated appointees, petitioned for a right of mandamus, compelling delivery of the commissions. So the court ruled that the new president, Thomas Jefferson, via his Secretary of State, James Madison, was wrong to prevent William Marbury from taking office as Justice of the Peace for Washington County in the District of Columbia. However, it also ruled that the court had no jurisdiction in the case and could not force Jefferson and Madison to seat Marbury. Chief Justice John Marshall, who was writing for a unanimous court, denied the petition and refused to issue the right. Although he found that the petitioners were entitled to their commission, he held that the Constitution did not give the Supreme Court the power to issue the rights of mandamus. In Section 13 of the Judiciary Act of 1789, it provided that such rights might be issued, but that the section of the Act was inconsistent with the Constitution, and therefore it was invalid. So overall, though the immediate effect of the decision was to deny power to the court, its long-term effect has been to increase the court's power by establishing the rule that it is emphatically the province and duty of the judicial department to say what the law is. Since Marbury v. Madison, the Supreme Court has been the final decider of the constitutionality of congressional legislation.